14,000 apartments in 39 different buildings, all mostly white tenants. That is until the Department of Justice took notice in 1973 and slammed Donald Trump and his father Fred Trump with a lawsuit. In October 1973, 5 years after graduating from Wharton, 27-year-old Donald Trump was already running his father's real estate empire. Imagine standing on top of a multi-million-dollar real estate kingdom at just 27 years old, feeling entirely invincible, believing the rules of normal society simply do not apply to you, and then suddenly receiving a direct legal notice from the highest law enforcement body in the entire nation. A notice that didn't just request a casual meeting, but laid out a devastating federal lawsuit accusing you of systemic, calculated, and widespread racial discrimination. Think about the psychological weight of that moment. Most people in their 20s are just trying to figure out how to navigate their early careers, pay their monthly bills, and figure out who they are. But Donald Trump wasn't most people. He was sitting in high-end glass offices overlooking New York City, draped in tailored suits, commanding an army of rental brokers, and controlling thousands of residential units across Brooklyn and Queens. To the outside world, he was the prodigal son who took his father's working-class outer borough empire and turned it into pure gold. He walked into every room as if he owned the floor, the walls, and the people standing inside it. And then, absolute silence fell over the executive suite. The document arrived, signed by federal prosecutors, hand-delivered under the authority of the United States Department of Justice. Donald loves that perception. I won. I won. I won. He is still, a year later standing in New York going, I won, I won, I won. He wants to make sure everybody in America knows he won. He comes off as being very, what's the word I'm looking for? Arrogant. Yeah, he's arrogant. He said, I think Donald Trump is an artful liar. I think he is a greedy, vicious, and arrogant man. Well, I don't know. Is that supposed to be a compliment or not? I'm not sure. And in one of his biggest fights of the 1980s, he went up against media mogul Merv Griffin in a fight over a casino in Atlantic City. People realize now that Merv made a bad deal. It's unfortunate that he's taken a fall, but he has taken the fall. Nothing much I can do about it. That same month, the Justice Department filed a federal lawsuit against Fred Trump, Donald Trump, and Trump Management Corporation. Let that sink into your mind for a second. When a normal business owner gets sued by the United States government, they panic. They hire quietly, they issue soft public statements, and they look for an immediate, quiet settlement behind closed doors to protect their brand. But Donald Trump didn't operate on normal human psychology. He didn't hide. He didn't back down. He reacted with an explosive, almost theatrical level of aggression that would become the trademark formula for his entire personal and political life over the next 50 years. When confronted with undeniable evidence, you attack the accuser. When backed into a corner, you double the stakes. When the law points out a breach, you claim you were the true victim all along. Trump management was charged with discriminating against African Americans and breaking federal law. Donald Trump, then just 27, was president of the company. The Department of Justice accused the Trumps of violating the Fair Housing Act, arguing they were turning away renters based on race and color. Who tipped them off? Local activists, so-called testers, posing as potential renters at Trump's buildings, mainly in Brooklyn and Queens. Elise Goldweber was a lawyer for the DOJ's Fair Housing section at the time and was called on to handle the Trump case. When the black testers came, they may have been shown apartments but were told nothing was available. Whereas when the white testers came, yes, there were things that were available. That would be the norm. Pause right there. Put yourself in the shoes of an applicant in 1973. You put on your best suit. You make sure your paperwork is immaculately organized. You drive down to a Trump property in Brooklyn with a deposit check ready in your pocket. You walk up to the leasing manager, smile politely, and submit an application for a vacant 2-bedroom unit that was advertised in the morning newspaper. The manager looks you up and down, takes your form, sets it face down on the desk, and says with a cold, practiced smile, I'm sorry, we just rented our last unit 5 minutes ago. There is nothing open here. You leave feeling disappointed but taking their word for it. Then, 30 minutes later, a young white man walks into that exact same leasing office. He asks for the exact same 2-bedroom apartment. The leasing agent smiles warmly, pulls out a set of keys and says, We have a beautiful unit on the 3rd floor ready for immediate move-in. Let me show you around. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding by an isolated manager. It was a mechanical, repeatable, bulletproof machine designed to filter people based on the color of their skin. Barack Obama is holding the complaint, and you watch Donald Trump. Do you ever laugh? Do you ever actually laugh? Most of the time. Did you ever actually watch that Access Hollywood Billy Bush tape? Did you ever sit? I did. You did. I saw it. And at that moment, did you know that it was going to be as notable as it turned out to be? Well, I did. Didn't you? Tweeting at the television doesn't fix things. Making stuff up doesn't make people's lives better. You've got to have a plan. You've got to put in the work. And along with the experience to get things done, Joe Biden has concrete plans and policies that will turn our vision of a better, fairer, stronger country into a reality. We literally left this White House a pandemic playbook that would have shown them how to respond before the virus reached our shores. I'm sorry, gentlemen. I've noticed this especially with some men who seem to think Trump's behavior, the bullying and the putting people down, is a sign of strength. And I am here to tell you that is not what real strength is. Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems since he rode down his golden escalator 9 years ago. There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes. It didn't allege one incident. It alleged a system. Prosecutors said Black and Puerto Rican applicants were told again and again that no apartments were available. White applicants minutes later were shown the same empty units. And if the Trumps did rent to a Black person, Goldweber recalls they would do so only at one building in Brooklyn, reserving the other buildings for white tenants, that the white people would live in Trump Village and the people of color would live in Flatbush. And according to the Justice Department, they even had a secret coding system to do it, a racial code. Here's how. Some of the applications were marked with a C, which we learned that it meant colored, so that the prospective tenants who had come in were noted to be colored. Yes, you heard her right. The Department of Justice alleged applications submitted by prospective African-American renters were designated with a secret code, such as C for colored, to indicate a Black person was looking to rent. Obama turns to the detail that made the case. Applications from Black renters weren't just rejected, they were marked at the letter C for colored. One woman testified she was turned away entirely, told there was nothing open. Another described watching a white applicant get approved on the spot, in her words, with freckles and red hair and a Jewish name. Same building, same week. If you were renting an apartment in New York City in 1973, you don't need this case explained. You either watched it happen to someone you knew, or you were the one who never got the call back. Trump denied everything at a December press conference that year and countersued the Justice Department for $100 million. A judge threw the countersuit out entirely. Obama sits the final page down. June 10, 1975, a consent decree, no admission of guilt. His attorney on the case was a young lawyer named Roy Cohn, the same man who would go on to mentor Trump for the next 2 decades. Quick, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the button. It takes 2 seconds. And if you already have, you're genuinely the reason this channel keeps finding pages like this one. Back to the evidence, a federal lawsuit, a letter on an application form, a 27-year-old already running the family business. The comments are open. If you remember when this case was actually in the news the first time, he never had to say it out loud. He just had to write the letter C. Donald Trump, current sitting president of the United States' second term, has called this case ancient history for 50 years without ever once addressing the letter on the form. The complaint sits open on the desk, the letter C still circled. We find the page number. That is the whole job. The patterns repeat. Now, step back from the paper for a moment and look at the larger picture. Look at how power operates when it feels completely unchallengeable. When the Department of Justice brought those charges back in late 1973, it wasn't just a routine legal challenge. It was a massive landmark moment for the Fair Housing Act of 1968, a piece of civil rights legislation passed in the wake of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. The law was intended to dismantle the institutional walls that kept minority communities locked out of generational wealth, decent housing, and safe neighborhoods. And yet, right in the heart of New York, a city that prided itself on being a beacon of diversity and progress, the Trump family was building a literal fortress of segregation across 39 major apartment complexes. They had built a system that operated seamlessly. It was efficient. It was silent. It was devastatingly effective. Think about the psychological toll on the victims. Imagine saving up money for months, working double shifts, dreaming of moving your family into a clean, safe building with reliable heat and good school districts nearby. You walk into the leasing office filled with hope. You present your proof of income, your references, your savings accounts. Everything is pristine. Yet the moment you turn around to leave, a pencil marks a quick, nearly invisible letter on the top corner of your application paper. C. That single stroke of graphite instantly invalidated your hard work, your savings, your reputation, and your humanity. It didn't matter if you were a decorated veteran, a school teacher, or a skilled mechanic. The code spoke louder than your character. And when the federal government finally gathered enough evidence through undercover testing, sending black and white investigators with identical financial profiles to apply for the exact same units hours apart, the mask came completely off. The data was undeniable. The discrepancy was overwhelming. The trap was sprung. So how did a 27-year-old Donald Trump handle the first monumental crisis of his career? Did he express remorse? Did he claim it was a rogue employee acting without executive knowledge? Did he quietly promise to overhaul company practices? No, he hired Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn wasn't just any lawyer. He was one of the most feared, ruthless, and polarizing legal figures in 20th century American politics. Cohn had risen to prominence in the 1950s as chief counsel to Senator Joseph McCarthy during the height of the infamous anti-communist Red Scare hearings. He was a master of dark political arts, media manipulation, and ruthless aggressive defense. His philosophy was simple: never apologize, never admit defeat, counterattack tenfold, claim victory regardless of the truth. Under Cohn's guidance, Donald Trump didn't just defend himself against the federal government. He launched an outrageous $100 million countersuit against the Department of Justice, alleging that the government was attempting to force them to rent to welfare recipients who would ruin their properties. It was an audacious public spectacle, a move designed not necessarily to win legally in a courtroom, but to dominate the headlines, intimidate accusers, and project total, unbreakable strength to his business partners and peers. When the judge eventually dismissed that countersuit as completely baseless, the Trumps were forced back into reality. In June 1975, after nearly 2 years of grueling legal combat, the case finally came to a close with a signed consent decree. Under the terms, Trump management was forced to implement major structural changes. They had to provide local urban leagues with weekly lists of vacancies, offer minority applicants preference for certain units, and take out newspaper ads explicitly stating that their properties were open to all races equally. Officially, the agreement stated there was no admission of guilt. And Donald Trump immediately took that exact phrase, ran out to the media cameras, and declared absolute victory. He claimed the government had failed, that he had won, and that the matter was completely settled on his terms. He said, "I won, I won, I won." He maintained that exact narrative for 5 decades. Whether it was facing federal fair housing lawsuits in the 1970s, fierce corporate rivalries in Atlantic City casinos in the 1980s, high-profile bankruptcies in the 1990s, explosive media leaks in the 2000s, or intense political scandals in the 2010s and 2020s, the blueprint remained 100% identical. Deny the facts completely. Attack the institution presenting the evidence. Countersue for an absurd amount to control the media cycle. Settle when necessary while claiming absolute innocence. Repeat the word victory until the public gets exhausted from arguing. It is an extraordinary study in audience psychology and personal branding. When you repeat a claim with absolute, unyielding conviction, even when faced with signed federal documents, eyewitness testimonies, and government records, a large portion of the public stops questioning the evidence and starts focusing on your confidence. Human beings are naturally drawn to certainty. In times of chaos, people often mistake aggression for strength and refusal to compromise for moral clarity. That is why, 50 years later, that 1973 lawsuit isn't just an old court filing collecting dust in a federal archive. It is the foundational text for understanding everything that followed. It is the original blueprint of a style of power that would eventually transform American real estate, American television, and ultimately, global geopolitics. Look back at the document sitting on that desk. Look at the circled letter C. It stands as a permanent historical record of a time, a place, and a philosophy of doing business. It doesn't matter how many decades pass, how many news cycles turn, or how many speeches are delivered from podiums around the world. The paper doesn't change, the ink doesn't fade, the record remains. The complaint sits open on the desk, the letter C remains circled, the pages turned, but the history is written, the patterns repeat.